Welcome, everybody. My name is David DeZina. I'm publisher for the Flom Publishing Group, which is part of the Bayard family of companies. And we're co-hosting this with 23rd Publications. And we're very excited to have Kathy Hendricks as our speaker. She's been our facilitator for all of the other series webinars. And now it's her turn to lead the show today. So we're very grateful. Kathy is our wonderful acquisitions editor for 23rd Publications, and a longtime veteran catechist and leader and author. And it's just wonderful to have her here to present today. So I'll turn it over to you, Kathy.
Thanks. And actually, I think Dan is going to speak a
Dan's
little bit.
Sorry. See, I'm new with the leadership one here today. So,
Dan Smart.
Dan Smart will lead us today, talking about some 23rd products.
Thank you, everybody. I'm Dan Smart, the sales manager for 23rd Publications. And Kathy has written many marvelous books, but I'd like to highlight just three today, if I may. The first is a booklet from our Refresher Faith series entitled The Holiness of the Catechist, celebrating the new directory of Catechesis. Framed by personal stories and inspiration from saints and spiritual writers, Kathy guides catechists here through the many insights the new directory offers about how to integrate holiness into catechetical ministry. From spiritual practices to the ways we experience God's beauty, she invites catechists to tap into the deep well of holiness within them and discover their own spiritual gifts. This is a great booklet. And the second booklet from Kathy is called Self-Care for Catechists, 20 Practices to Enhance Your Well-Being. And we all know that being a catechist and actually being in ministry and working in the church is not a 9-to-5 job. It's really often so many evening meetings and long weekends of presence at Mass and beyond, and really nonstop service to others. And this wonderful booklet is a gift to nourish even the most tired spirits. Kathy offers ideas, prayers, and activities to refresh not only your soul, but your ministry as well. This is a really great booklet to share at the beginning of the year or an end of the year gift for catechists. Last but not least, the book that I love so much, Prayers and Rituals for the Home, Celebrating the Life and Times of Your Family. And for parents seeking ways to work prayer into family life, this really helpful booklet shows how to easily incorporate prayers and practices into daily routines and special occasions. Parents will learn how to personalize prayer for their own families, get suggestions for bringing Catholic spirituality into every corner of the home, and learn why prayer is so vital, especially when it's most difficult and challenging. This is it's a practical, uplifting book for today's families. Anyway, thank you for your time, and I'm going to turn the mic over to David. Thank you.
And from Flom, we have a couple of resources I'd like to highlight. We're showing here the liturgical year calendar actually for next year, and the planner for catechists, which has been a long time resource from our catechist brand. You can talk to your sales representative for pre-ordering for next year, and we're having a special discount on the current year's liturgical calendar and planning guide if you'd like to look into that as well. You can go to flom.com, you can call your customer service representative, and I'll put that number of information on the chat. Those are very good resources. We have a classroom poster for the liturgical year, as well as one for families, and it's in English or Spanish. And there's this coming year in 2023, the fall, we'll have a code, as you see the little sample there, the QR code that will lead to activities, free download activities, several. I think there's about 90 activities that you could use throughout the year, activity masters. And in the current planning guide, as well as the next year's planning guide, that same QR code will be there. We added it to the calendar for this coming year. It's a great additional resource that comes with the order. It's a great bonus. The other is to subscribe to our Grow blog, which is our weekly blog primarily for those who use the Flom Gospel Weekly's catechetical program, but really for catechists and families as well. There's weekly gospel reflections and resources, handouts, and it's all free to sign up. And if you go to gospelweeklies.com, you'll see the information on the blog. And I'll also provide that link as we're going on today. So that's it for me. And now we can turn it over to Kathy this time, I think, for the rest of the real presentation.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks.
Thanks. And welcome to you all. Many of you, I think, are joining us again for this is the last in a series of webinars that we've called Shaping the Future of Catechesis Together. And, you know, we've come now to a question of, in a sense, now what? You know, what do we do? What do we do next? We're really trying to get to the heart of where we are at this moment in time for us in the catechetical community, as well as in our global situation. You know, this has been just such an up and down time. We've gotten a lot of mixed signals. Unfortunately, my thing doesn't work here. It's not working. It's, you know, the League of Your Own. I don't know why it's not moving here, but you know, we're Tom Hanks and Gina Davis are both giving signals to the batter in that movie, and I so loved it. I tried to upload a GIF here, but it's not working. But haven't we been in that? You know, masks or no masks? Do we open or close the parish? Do we have a online catechesis or in the parish? And it's been a stop and start process, you know, for almost 2 years now. So we're really getting to this point of, I think, fatigue, but also this very important question. So that's kind of my task, is kind of to look now and wrap up these webinars, but look at where we're going. And to do so, I'd like to start with some reflections for these uncertain times, and just invite you to take a moment to reflect on these readings, because our scriptures continue to speak to us in these times. And this first one may be unsettling, but it is an unsettled time. So let us pray. A reading from the Gospel of Matthew. 2 men will be out in the field. One will be taken and one will be left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill. One will be taken and one will be left. Therefore, stay awake, for you do not know on which day your Lord will come. A reading from the prophet Jeremiah. For I know well the plans I have in mind for you, plans for your welfare and not for woe, so as to give you a future of hope. When you call me and come and pray to me, I will listen to you. When you look for me, you will find me. Yet, when you seek me with all your heart, I will let you find me, and I will change your lot. I will gather you together from all the nations and all the places to which I have banished you, and bring you back to the place from which I have exiled you. You know, if we had more time to really kind of break open those scriptures and look at a word or phrase from each one that grabs you, I think this line from Matthew, "You do not know," may strike us all. How many of us have experienced displacement, as the Jeremiah reading describes exile, as a result of the pandemic, displacement at our jobs, our parishes, our routines, our relationships. And while these aren't the end times, we were taken by surprise, and we experienced a kind of exile, many of us, over the past 2 years. In my own experience, almost 2 years ago, it was 2 years ago in March, next month, I was in Florida. to offer back-to-back missions. I was there for 2 weeks to offer missions in 2 different parishes, and a midweek session for PCLs, for parish catechetical leaders. And when I got to Florida, news of the pandemic was breaking, but and the parish was kind of, as a mission, I had to speak at all of the masses. And I remember the pastor just talking to people about, well, you leave it up to you whether you want to feel safe to do the sign of peace, but don't worry about it. We've been through these kind of things before. And that was the first weekend. By the time I got to the session for the PCLs in the middle of that week, the virus had spread so quickly that I was questioning the safety of continuing. And the kicker came, of all things, from the National Basket Association when they canceled their season. And I'm not a sports fan, but I thought, something tells me that when the NBA is canceling their season, something serious. And then I got a text from my daughter, Anna, who is not an alarmist by any means, but she said, "What are you doing, Mom? You've got to get home right away. This is dangerous." So by then it was determined that we needed to cancel this second mission, and I flew home. And I had to head to my daughter's home in the mountains to pick up my husband because he had broken his ankle. So everything, was kind of one thing piled on top of another. And so he was staying with Anna and her family in a mountain town. And they urged us to stay with them because they said it would be much safer for us to do that than to return to our home on the Front Range near Denver. And so we essentially never returned home permanently again. We had planned to move here to be closer to our daughter and our grandchildren, but this accelerated everything. We ended up selling our house and we moved in with them for 6 months to help with childcare. And so when I look back at that time, there are words that come to mind that describe this experience in my own life of displacement, being unsettled, something left behind, but also something new beginning. So that's a little bit of my story. I'd like to invite you to think about, or maybe place in the chat box, reflect, how did your life change as a result of the pandemic, both personally and ministerially? And, we don't have time for a lot of, stories to be shared. So maybe you just want to put a word or a phrase in the chat box that could kind of encapsulate your experience of change during the time of the pandemic. So I'm just going to stop my sharing here for a minute and ask David maybe to monitor some of those conversations, or, maybe to share just even your experience, David, a little bit, any word or phrase that comes to mind, or a story.
Seeing some here that came up, we said isolation, others, cancellation of Holy Week was devastating. Had to be more creative with catechesis, absolutely. Flexibility, roll with the punches. I'm just reading some of the ones that are coming in now. Uncertainty and learning Zoom, like we're doing here. This was a lot more polished at the last webinar than we were at the beginning because of for that same reason. Retreats and workshops moved to Zoom, worried and uncertain. I can say, as these are coming in from on the publishing side, adapting quickly to help customers at parishes and schools. It was amazing how we all really just jumped in. My editorial team, the company, we all just worked to really help families, parishes and school, all at that time, immediately, like getting things up digitally. All the publishers did that, providing the resources digitally, ungating all the websites to not worry about passwords and things like that for families that all of a sudden became catechists on the spot. Thinking that when things shifted digital, it's easier. It certainly is not from a publishing standpoint. There's so much has to happen right away, and things we hadn't planned on, or even resources we didn't plan on developing.
Yes.
Life-changing, Sarah says life-changing, absolutely. How to pivoting, I saw that to come through. And you really do have to learn to adapt very quickly.
Yeah.
Carol said that parish pivoting had to unite 3 parishes.
Yeah, and Carol, I do want to point out, Carol Eipers is on, and she is writing a booklet for 23rd on pivoting, the parishes in pivoting, and so it's going to come out in a few months. And so that what a word that for ministers, and like you said, the publishers, everybody had to pivot very quickly, and we have to remain nimble. I mean, we don't know what's coming, so, and I think I did notice a few, people saying that there was kind of a time for family too. And, I would say, in my own situation, we had a grandson born during the pandemic. And so our lives took on some new joy as well during this time. So, it hasn't all been negative, but it's certainly been a challenge. Sure. So, well, let me go back. I'll just share my screen again here. And just kind of pick up here then, that this series of webinars that we've been doing on shaping the future of catechesis, what we had hoped to do through this, and I think our guest presenters just did a marvelous job in helping us with this, is offer some very rich perspectives on the way we've responded to the pandemic, but also giving us glimpses as to how to move forward. The last webinar we had was, our guest presenter was Denise Utter, and she offered a very helpful look at the way that parishes pivoted during this time, there's that word again, and used digital tools for very creative uses. And I noticed some of you saying Zoom, learning Zoom and doing retreats through that sort of thing. And in doing so, Denise uncovered some really new, exciting new possibilities that we can carry forward in ministry. And I just remember how many wonderful comments we got of people using different platforms that I had never even heard of. So I learned a lot through that session. And then prior to that, Lee Donesco did a great job of reminding us of what she called old school values that we cannot afford to lose in the process. She anchored these in community, simplicity, and tenacity. And she noted how each one keeps us anchored in a solid catechetical vision. And that's really important, that we're not running off, joining this jumping on this bandwagon or that bandwagon. And so between the two of them, I think Denise and Lee just provided this wonderful balance. And then prior to that, Connie Clark noticed the importance of paying attention to the ongoing effects of the pandemic and the need for active listening. I really think this links with that first reading from Matthew about staying alert and staying awake. Through a process called guided conversations, she presented some very thoughtful and insightful questions for reflection based on the Beatitudes. And then Bill Miller started us off in a beautiful fashion, in a beautiful session that was very reflective, drew us into consideration of both hope and joy. Both of these virtues, he stressed, must be part of our efforts as we move forward. And I think that underscores everything that we're doing. So what's next then? What do we move on to? Each of our presenters were careful to note that we cannot afford to move backwards or to ignore the massive changes that we have undergone as a global and national community and as a church. And I know that we all feel that. We know there's no turning back to the way it used to be, tempting as that can sound. And Jesus gives us some sage advice around this in this very familiar scripture passage from Matthew. People do not put new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise, the skins burst, the wine spills out, and the skins are ruined. Rather, they put new wine into fresh wineskins, and both are preserved. I just love that reading, and I think it just, encapsulates again what we need to be doing as we move forward. So in my time, what I'd like to propose is a CCD approach. And by that, I mean one that focuses on the catechist, the content, and the dynamics as we move forward. So I want to just look at those very briefly. in this webinar, and then I'll pause after each one for you to add your thoughts, because this is very much a conversation, so we really value your input. And so starting with the Catechist and the need for new models of formation. During the pandemic, we were gifted with two important documents from the Vatican. The first being the Directory for Catechesis, and then the papal letter Antiquum Ministerium, Ancient Ministry, in which Pope Francis formally announced the lay ministry of the catechist. Each one of these is a significant movement in our catechetical community and in our catechetical work. And they each provide hope and guidance as we move forward. I think there's a lot to unpack, of course, in both of these, but both of them underscore the importance of a catechetical vision that is inclusive, hopeful, inspirational, healing, and forward-looking. And I feel that one of the most vital parts of the new directory is this identification or description, and I think expansion of an understanding of the call of the catechist and what is called the threefold identity of the catechist. Just look at these descriptors in this threefold identity. The catechist called to be witness and keeper of the memory of God. The catechist called to be a teacher and mystagogue. And the catechist called to be an accompanier and educator. And when you look at this and we break this open, we start to really look at what this means in terms of formation. Isn't this going to necessitate new forms and models of formation of the catechist that honors this identity and prepares them for this vital ministry, an official ministry of the church? Now, our experience with digital tools is offering some very creative ways to do this, while also calling upon us to retain those old school values that have underscored our efforts in catechesis for decades. By now, I think we're all familiar with the emphasis Pope Francis puts on the art of accompaniment. In a post-pandemic milieu, this becomes all the more vital as in the person of the catechist, one who is called to walk with others. As the directory states, this style calls for a humble willingness to allow oneself to be touched by the questions and confronted by the situations of life with a gaze full of compassion, but also respectful of the other's freedom. This is something that I think Connie Clark just beautifully encapsulated in her webinar on guided conversations. The directory goes on to say, the new development to which the catechist is called resides in the proximity, in the unconditional acceptance, and in the gratuitousness with which he makes himself available to walk beside others in order to listen to them and explain the scriptures, without establishing the route in advance, without demanding to see the fruits, and without holding anything back for himself or herself. There's a lot in there to unpack, but let me just stop here again and ask for your comments on this. I'm sorry, I didn't want to do that just yet. I want to show you the question. So how might we then adapt our formation processes to prepare catechists for their ministry? What are some of those models? What are some of the things that we, maybe we are doing or have been doing, but where do we need to go in terms of formation? So I'll just stop here and invite David back on for any thoughts on this, as well as any thoughts that any of you want to put into the chat box. Any thoughts on that, David, in terms of that threefold identity?
Sure. A couple weeks ago, we met, the FLOB team met with the diocesan directors in all of Texas, and we asked what they're looking for. They had a chance to go around and talk about the things that have happened, similar to what we're doing here, what's changed and what their concerns are. And more than one diocese came up with the need to help train parish leaders to train facilitators. Like there's
Mm,
a lack of, you can give them a video series, you can have a Bible study, a small group Bible study, but how to do that, how to find the people to do that, especially now when
Yeah.
you're trying to recruit new leaders, because so many catechists have decided to retire or whatever you want to call it.
right.
There's a lack of training all around. I think you could take it from the diocesan level down to a parish leader to then a catechist.
Right.
A lot of changes happened during this time.
Yeah. And that word facilitator is, to facilitate a conversation, if you will, to facilitate the kind of learning or opening up. I saw somebody put the word evangelization
Yeah.
in the chat box. It is so important to listen, and we need good listening skills to be a accompanier and to facilitate. Yeah.
Carol writes how to offer formation that models what catechists are called to do.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Focus
Yeah.
on the spiritual formation person of the catechist.
Oh.
Somebody was on with a diocesan director a couple of days ago, and she was saying, "What's now with the limited national conferences that are available? And even LA Congress is hybrid this year, and will it return to the full numbers it used to have? There's no place to go as a group to gather to train anymore, to learn together, to send somebody off to learn. We have, of course, University of Dayton, University of Dallas, and other places that have online training. But there's not a lot of places to gather anymore as a group to learn and meet each other.
Right. Yeah. I hear, I see somebody said needing to meet them where they are. They're not stay-at-home moms anymore.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even that while Zoom or whatever virtual worked, in some cases I saw it from the previous comment about how for confirmation it wasn't quite the same. And I know my wife was leading a virtual catechist confirmation class, and these are kids had been, from what I understand, very engaged in the classroom, which is always a great thing to have. But on camera, either they're dead by Sunday night or just whatever, not into it. Hard to get them to talk. So there's that Zoom fatigue. As much as it helped us, it helps us to be more diverse and to pivot. There's the fatigue where you're not going to get the same interaction as you would in the classroom,
right?
In a room, especially not just class, but in a session.
Yeah.
Parents stepped up to the plate to prepare children first communion. I'm very happy to hear that, because I'm sure that places weren't that way, but this is the time. This is it to do that. Yeah. Bill's saying spiritual training for catechists to focus on falling in love with God and being passionate. Bishop Barron says, catechists on fire with the faith. That's what we need, because that's how it trickles down to the children and young people. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and I'm very, I love Bill's comment there, and somebody else had something up about spiritual formation, and that, that just opens my heart. I mean, when I wrote the little booklet on the holiness of the catechist, I was so taken with that in the directory of, there's very little mention of sin in the directory. It's all about coming to Christ, coming to love, coming to spread the joy of the gospel to others. And I think that is just so vital. People need healing today. And so that's going to take me to my next point. I'm going to, I hate to cut anything off because there's somebody.
I'm just amazed as you're going to. I'm amazed how many people were saying about spiritual formation.
Yeah,
that's come up. If you look at the chat, so many people are commenting on that. It's a really good point.
Yeah. Well, and just to look at the numbers, COVID by the numbers, I went on to the CDC and the World Health Organization just a couple of days ago, and these numbers have actually even changed. Look at these staggering numbers. I'm sorry that I don't have numbers for Canada up here as well, because we have some Canadian friends with us, but the death rate here in the US close to, I think it has topped 900,000, and the global death rate of almost 6 million. It just takes your breath away. And then the total cases of people that have had COVID or been diagnosed with COVID, 75 million in global cases, 386 million. And that's, rising. for every case, for every number there, and statistics can just numb our brains, and close down our hearts. But for every one of those, there's a circle of other people who are affected, those who are mourning the deaths. I know 3 people myself who died of COVID. Those who have recovered, but that are suffering long-term effects. Those who have suffered from the isolation. There's a lot of people that are fearful, and some of that's driving this misinformation and the divisiveness that has surfaced. And then there's the ongoing battles between, strife around issues like vaccines and mask wearing. And, it'd be one thing, this is the only thing going on in our world, but it isn't. We've got, the Ukrainian situation and where we are, like the nuclear clock is ticking, and it's moved a little bit farther, to the doomsday point. The murder of George Floyd and other people of color in our country, in the US, and this ongoing need to address the scourge of racism and white supremacy. It's just horrifying. And the rise in anti-Semitism, the attacks against people of Asian descent. I mean, it's just, you just go on and on and on with that. There's refugees who are fleeing their countries in order to find safe havens for their family. And, you could just get so weighed down by all of that. We cannot carry on as before, as I've said. We're truly at a time that speaks to the recognition of the church as a place of healing and service that Pope Francis described so beautifully in Evangelii Gaudium. And I know that we're familiar with this imagery of the church as the field hospital, but it's worth reading again in light of COVID and in light of these deep, deep wounds in our societies, in our planet. I didn't even mention global warming, of course, the climate change. But what the Pope is saying, listen to these words. The thing the church needs most today is the ability to heal wounds and to warm the hearts of the faithful. I mean, that sentence alone is just something that we should so much take to heart. It needs nearness, proximity. I see the church as a field hospital after battle. It is useless to ask a seriously injured person if he has high cholesterol and about the level of his blood sugars. You have to heal his wounds. Then you can talk about everything else. Heal the wounds, heal the wounds. And you have to start from the ground up. So this brings us to that second C, the content in that CCD approach, the importance of sharing the Christian story. Our story is compelling, and it must be told. And it has to be told in this new way, if you will. But, it isn't changing, but we keep evolving in our understanding. And I start here with Scripture, how we might draw upon our Scriptures as we minister to others. It not only brings hope, which is different than platitudes or fixed, easy fixes in these desperate times, but it brings challenges as well. Those readings at the beginning, I chose very deliberately. But how are we finding and mining the Scriptures for their meaning for people in this day and age, through all that we're living through? The calls for justice, the calls for compassion, the calls for mercy, the calls to walk with each other, what it means to be in exile, what it means to be redeemed and saved. I mean, all of these things are so vital. And then, our sacramentality, our sense of sacramentality and our celebration of the liturgy and the sacraments. I know another person on, is my dear friend and colleague, Barbara Radke, I believe is on our call as well. She wrote a beautiful book for 23rd on the sacraments, and starts with that sense of sacramentality, that sense of God with us through what we can see and feel and touch and hear. And, our liturgies are just so powerful. How might our catechesis around the sacraments and sacramental celebrations, the catechumenate, which is, kind of the model for our catechetical enterprise according to the directory, how might each one be an opportunity to share the messages of belonging, nurturing, healing, love, and service? And then there are, of course, the themes of Catholic social teaching and the works of mercy. How do we refresh each one and present them in a new and invigorating way? You know, it's always so depressing to me to think that whenever I offer to talk on justice, I got so little response to that. I don't know why we can't engage people more with this exciting sense of being called to justice and peace and to be people of mercy. You know, I have to say that Year of Mercy was such an incredible thing. You know, so often we have years of in the church and they kind of peter out after a few months, but that one took hold, and I think it took root in people's lives, and because the word itself is so compelling. And we have a message around that. We have concrete steps around that. How do we reinvigorate that? And then, as many of you noted, for Catechesis, but I think for our general content, our vital teachings around prayer and spiritual practices. How might we reintroduce the saints and the mystics as a way to move more deeply into relationship with Christ? So often our accounts of the saints are just focused on their outer work. And it's great. I mean, that's wonderful. It's important, but I think we need to mine the spirituality of these saints. What underscored their passion and their compassion towards others? And not just saints in the past, but our living saints. My dear friend, Father Bill McNichols, is being profiled in a book on mercy because of his great compassionate outreach to victims of HIV/AIDS at the beginning of that pandemic. And, you know, it is so touching. It's such a touching story about people who have reached out in not just in past times, but are doing so here and now. And how do we make that part of our catechetical content? This is part of the new wine that we're being called to serve in these times. And so what possibilities do you see lying in the content of our catechesis? And again, I'll just stop here and ask David to rejoin. And, you know, just, I know, you know, you're a publisher, so you know a lot about content. And what you see as vital.
Yeah, I think in terms of, you know, content, we saw a lot of comments about the spirituality before, spirituality, catechist, and self-care is certainly growing. And I did put in the chat, for those who didn't see it, several resources that we offer on the spirituality of catechists, called to be a catechist already.
Wonderful.
If anybody has any questions they'd like to throw ideas of this, please let us know. Resources for parents, more how to be witnesses of the faith, as the new order of baptism says, instead of teachers of the faith, as witnesses. Nourishment of, Carol saying, nourishment of prayer, that we're never alone. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I noticed that another thing during the initial part of the pandemic, and this is not just from our sales team at FLUM, but I've heard from other publishers too, that the sales team really became a support, a voice to those feeling isolated in parish. People didn't know what to do. So they, instead of us worrying about providing maybe content or selling or whatever it would be, taking orders, we were there as mentors or supporting one another. I know Dave Barosi's on the call. I know he did that a lot with his New York customers, just being there to support one another during that time. Laura says, connection between tradition and life, liturgy and life. Absolutely.
Absolutely. I think that it is so important that we're not caught in dead doctrine. You know, I remember the late Father Ed Hayes used to call dogmas beliefs set in stone, and a living tradition is something that keeps opening up and evolving. And I think this is something Pope Francis keeps trying to remind us of. You know, that idea that we are that this is alive. This is, you know, this is something that is still relevant. You know, and for those of you who haven't had a chance to see Connie Clark's webinar, I hope you get a chance to go back and look at, because she took the Beatitudes and she framed these questions around COVID concerns. You know, it was so beautiful. And then, so there's so much possibility. When I think of the sacraments, and I always loved sacramental preparation when I was at DRE. And I think of the anointing of the sick, some of our liturgies and our sacramental celebrations have such potential. Reconciliation, what do we need to reconcile with in terms of this time, and how are we going to revitalize that? So, okay, and I think leads into some of the dynamics as well that we're asked to consider at this time, because the how of what we do is as important as the who and the what. This is the image of the new wineskins, which I think our previous presenters offered us in their webinars. That we need to use new means of catechizing through digital technology, while also holding to some of our tried and true methods, which Denise and Lee presented in their lovely webinars. The need to engage in conversation through posing questions, encouraging reflection, and telling stories. It's been very intentional on our part to, in all of these webinars, our process has been exactly what I've been doing here. And we kind of started that with Bill Miller, who, we would pause every once in a while and invite times for chat. And what we found in it, and after each webinar, we've all just been, oh my gosh, that was so great, because the best part was the chat part, of getting the feedback from those of you who are listening. Do you really want to just sit and watch me talk or listen to me talk for an hour? No, that's hard enough in person. But using these technological tools to do exactly what Connie's saying here is, how do we engage in conversation and questioning and telling stories, which is so vital. There's limits to how we can do that, but there's also possibilities around that. And then to carry out all of what we're doing, the how of what we're doing with hope and joy. I've often said to catechists, how many of you would want to follow Jesus, if he was kind of bent over with weariness and come follow me, and, and, nobody wants to follow someone who's just looks deadened by their work, and so I often would remind catechists of how they look when their students come into a class. Our children engaged by the very sight of a catechist who's excited and so happy to see them. So Bill really did such a lovely job of calling us to be people of hope, but also people of joy. And I'm really grateful to Pope Francis for bringing the word joy out of just the Advent Christmas season and into our entire year. It's not a word that we have maybe incorporated into our daily vocabulary. Joy is very different from happiness, but that joy that comes even in the midst of trying times like these. And then the directory in its it calls for changing dynamics in a changing world. Just look at this image. Here's my grandson, Clay. Oh, and before he was even a year old, look at this. This is really an illustration of a digital native. He and his sister, who's just about to be 4, learned very quickly about this, and not because anybody's been teaching them, and their parents are very keen on limiting their screen time, but this is the dynamics in a changing world. This is what they're growing with and learning. And so the director really notes, while offering some cautions around going, too crazy and how there are some setbacks to digital technology, and certainly our online, look at all the potential for misinformation that's been happening now through social media. There's also a lot of potential and possibilities. And yet what the directory is saying is it's noting these different modes of learning, accessing information, and relating to others that are part of this new world or changing world, if you will. One of which they say are images, the preference for images over listening, which calls, as the directory says, for producing a new language and ways of organizing thoughts. And this is kind of new and yet old. Our images have been powerful in our catechetical endeavors for centuries. You know, we all know that stained glass windows have their roots in catechizing for an illiterate population. And so our images are very vital. It's why whenever I do webinars like this, I always have some kind of an image to go with. You know, I try not to put a lot of words up. And I'm very, very grateful that I live with a very talented photographer, so I don't have to seek out permissions to use photos. Ron is very gracious in letting me use them as part of my my webinars, but I love this in PowerPoint that we have the possibility to project images. I think that we need to draw that in to what we're doing, being less wordy and more visual, if you will. There's also this reality of multitasking, hypertextuality, and interactivity, which results, as the directory says, in a more emotional and intuitive way of learning versus the analytical. And that's, you know, that could take a lot to unpack some of that, but that interaction that David was saying, you know, it is very tricky when you're on a Zoom call. How do we make that happen? How do we create those kind of conversational opportunities through some of our new technology or through some of our approaches? And I think that's even when we're in person. How do we create that kind of conversation? And then storytelling over traditional forms of discourse. The directory says the language that has the greatest hold on the digital generation is that of the story, rather than that of argumentation, which is really interesting because it looks like everybody's arguing with each other right now. But it is through stories that we tend to connect with one another. And it's so powerful. I think that's been something we've known that for a long, long time in our catechetical work, the importance of telling our stories and getting in touch with our stories, and then making a connection with that larger story. That's been part of our process for quite a long time now. In our catechetical resources, I think all of our publishers, for the most part, have really incorporated that beautifully into the dynamics of catechesis. But it just seems to kind of ramp up even more now, especially because I'm finding, you know, I think it's really so interesting that so many of us know more about the stories of others than we do of our own families. And so I have always pushed for that. You know, Dan showed that book, Prayers and Rituals for the Home, and part of that ritual is storytelling. And how do we facilitate storytelling? I told him the other day, I said, I almost feel like I need to revise that book from the grandparents' perspective, because as a grandmother now, I'm watching my grandchildren's progress. I'm watching them, their lives unfold in a way I couldn't as a parent. And what I'm doing for both of them is writing a storybook for them. I write them a letter. I have a little book for each of them. And every month on the anniversary of their birthday, the 24th for Clay, the 26th for River, I write them a letter and tell them their story. I'm telling them about the pandemic right now. I'm telling them about the world that they're growing up in. And this is something that, you know, let's not forget in our dynamics, the importance of the extended family, the grandparents, certainly, but also the aunts and uncles. I know, you know, my friend Barbara, who's on the call, you know, she has such a great relationship with her nieces and nephews and great nieces and nephews. And there's that extended family that we could be tapping into, as well as, you know, our circle of friends and how we tell those stories. So, you know, this is just a few thoughts on dynamics, but what other dynamics do you see that are going to play out as we move forward in our catechetical efforts? maybe what you're using now or what you're seeing or potential in those kind of dynamics. So I'll pause again for a dynamic of conversation and invite David for some of his thoughts and you to put yours in there into the chat box. So any thoughts on that, David?
What you're presenting, we've been posting some resources, some by you and some by others, to fit on especially prayers and rituals for the home, and then also the holiness of the catechist that you wrote. We talked about that earlier, self-care for catechists as well. Any other thoughts of what the people have been, what you've been using, looking for, or hoping to use at some point too? Please feel free to get in the chat.
And while we're waiting for those, I really do hope that if you have not, those of you on have not had a chance to peruse the new directory on that that whole chapter, the whole piece on digital catechesis, it's really worth reading, and I think those looking at the way our families and our young people are learning and interacting.
Alicia, you raise a very good point. She said families that left religion program hoping they will return, they did not want to attend the masks. So I would address that. Hopefully they re-register, reacclimating families to gather in person, also including digital component that's not going away. Now, we did a survey last year, and a lot of people answered about digital resources as a filler rather than the future of catechesis. It's interesting. We thought, would there be a shift? And it's very hard, of course, to have a tablet in the faith formation program. But there's definitely needs to be some kind of digital component that's clear, and then having that option for home study or for a hybrid. And I've said this at other webinars, my concern about some of the changes when we shift to a family catechesis or a hybrid model is that some families who have been on the fringe will go away. It's not just about the masks even, it's that they just don't want to put that effort in. And to use Sister Pat McCormick's line about the parking lot parent, we're asking a parking lot parent to become a catechist all of a sudden. And that shift is not going to work for everybody. And we need to be that bridge and engage them more, certainly. Because we don't want to lose these families. And of course, they need their faith more than ever.
Well, and I noticed, there's a few people saying that about, what are the dynamics going to be in terms of welcoming people back to the community? That reading from Jeremiah just strikes me of being dispersed, and so how do we, what sort of evangelizing dynamics are we going to put in place in our parishes to encourage people to come back, to welcome them back? So, and here I see something about
PowerPoint slides for formation, ways to just keep an audio visual way to engage children. Yes. What were you going to say, Kathy?
Well, I just saw something pop up about, now I've lost the chat here, so you may have to read it, but something about, let's see, to be aware of what's happening in the digital age, especially with the older children.
Yes.
And that's so right. If we can't connect with them, if we're not aware of what they're immersing themselves in, and it's their attention spans are even shorter than they used to be. So I think that the process of a catechetical lesson really has to change, to allow for more what I'd call chunking of material. So that you're not doing this long presentation, and it's really and I would say too, not going overboard. I think some of them get tired of, I just read an article this morning about from cringe. I guess that's the thing. What's considered cringe by young people when you're trying too hard and being overly, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm sure I'm guilty of that. So the eye rolls that come, whatever. that not to let go of those older, techniques, like Lee said, of a good story is compelling, and how you tell it is compelling. We have 2 booklets coming out from 23rd on how to be good storytellers. Heidi is writing one for little younger children, and Carol Eipers is writing for the middle school. And I think it's just wonderful, that idea of how do I become a good storyteller, or encourage others to do that. So, okay, well, let me just kind of wrap this up here, because we're getting close to the end of our time, and I want to allow for any closing comments or questions. But we began with the passage from Matthew 24 about being snatched out of the field, or the grinding the mill, which sounds pretty dire. But this is the thing about scripture, that you always have to take it in context. And earlier in this chapter 24 from Matthew, there's a message of hope in this full gospel account, in which Jesus says, learn a lesson from the fig tree. When its branch becomes tender and sprouts leaves, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things, know that he is near at the gates. Amen, I say to you. This generation will not pass away until these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. And it's this enduring word of God, this hope that we have in that eternal presence, that's what sustains and moves us forward. We can all take comfort and strength from this understanding and knowledge. And I think also that we're not alone in this. I think Carol puts a comment up about we need to help people pray and know that they're not alone. And that's such a powerful message right now. That's part of that content. It's part of our dynamics. Part of the role of the catechist walking with is that we are not alone, and that the word of God is enduring even in these hard times. So rest assured that our efforts here at 23rd and Flom are to walk with you as you move forward in your catechetical roles. I do want to invite you to watch for a resource that's going to be released containing the information shared in these webinars by all of our presenters, as well as participants. I'm going to be taking this, the purpose of the webinars was to come up with something that we could publish at 23rd and offer to you as we look at shaping the future of catechesis together. So that will be published in the fall of this year, and we'll be certainly sending information out to you. So I thank you so much for this chance to be with you. May you be richly blessed in all your efforts in serving those whom you catechize and with whom you walk in faith. Do feel free to contact us. Here is my email address, and also I just started a new blog with my friend and colleague Barbara Radke, so please visit our blog, because we'll have information about Barbara has a new booklet coming out from 23rd on retirement, and I'll be sharing information about this book on shaping the future of catechesis. And then David, there's his contact information. So thank you again. I'll turn it back over to you, David, to kind of wrap it up and take any last comments or questions or thoughts.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Kathy. This is a wonderful conclusion that summarizes all of what's been presented in the past webinars. I did post the link to the webinar. We have a webinar channel or playlist on YouTube that has all of the past webinars we've had here, and Kathy's will be added to that as soon as we upload it. So if you have any questions, I've posted my email address. You see it there. Another simple way, if you forget, is also editor@flom.com. That comes to my inbox as well. I've seen that in the chat there are a lot of questions that certainly we don't have time to answer here, but we are noting that the questions, if there's something you'd like to ask that goes well beyond our session today, just email me or Kathy, and we would be happy to get back to you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Kathy. It's just been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody. God bless.